think there's something inherently appealing about a youthful Peter Parker. The dynamic of balancing high school and being Spider Man has always been so interesting, and I feel like is a big contributor to what put Spider Man on the map way back in the 60s. And it all got me thinking, I really need to revisit that original high school era of the comic books. The foundations of the Spider Man mythos was literally being built with every issue, with introductions happening left and right. The whole concept of Peter Parker being a teenager or being in high school has pretty much followed him everywhere, wherever he appears, at least for the first time, and when he's the main character, certainly. Yeah, so recently I just reread the entirety of what I dubbed the high school era, again, the 37 issues that I have on this little tier list I made, and we are going to rank them from worst to best. While I do have them on a tier list, I think it's far more interesting to have a numerical order ranking, especially for the sake of making a video. Makes you think a little bit harder and makes, I feel like, opinions more diverse. That being said, there are some house rules of ranking that I just like to clear up. These are very basic. I feel like pretty much everybody says this, but this is not some scientific or literary analysis. This is based on layers of subjectivity and personal preference. Things like the artwork, writing, dialogue, all of that will play a role into it. Heck, even my nostalgia might have a certain effect on it depending on the circumstances of when I first encountered a comic. All of this is very tailored to me, and I feel like that's what makes rankings interesting, that you can watch two different videos on YouTube and have completely different things to say in orders. Also, for the sake of the comment section, like if you have the time or if you have read these, I'd love to hear where you differ, or even just if you could drop your full list, that'd be amazing. All that being established, let's get into it. Coming in at 37th place, the bottom of the pile, is the first Daredevil comic book. Now, this was included in the list of comic books Spider-Man appeared in because he's used on the cover and in like the first page. He literally doesn't even appear or matter to the storyline. He's just used as like a, hey, brought to you by the same people that made Spider-Man, comparing Daredevil to the character is pretty much just entirely a marketing tactic, which is fine. I'm not, critiquing that. I'm just saying Spider-Man doesn't do anything in this issue, which kind of makes it a no-brainer because he at least appears in every other issue we have on this list. So it kind of just has to be the last by literally what it is. Next, in 36th place, we have the Avengers issue number 3. And again, Spider-Man plays just a very minimal role in this. He makes a little cameo as Iron Man is like image projecting himself, scouring the city. I think they're looking for Hulk at the time, and they find Spider-Man webbing up some crooks, and they just have a brief encounter with one another. I feel like it's the first time Spider-Man talks to Iron Man, potentially, and yeah, it's just Spider-Man just makes a cameo. You'll see these types of things throughout the comic books. Again, it's not like he does anything or adds much to the story, just a passerby within the issue to connect the Marvel Universe. Now we have the Fantastic Four Annual number 1. Now, this is a bit interesting because it added some more scenes to technically a scenario we already got in Spider-Man 1, in which he fights the Fantastic Four. Originally, this was basically just to showcase Spider-Man's powers and kind of contrast them with one of Marvel's most popular comic book magazines at the time, their first family, the Fantastic Four. And this kind of set a tone where Spider-Man would be repeatedly involved with the FF, especially Human Torch, Johnny Storm. But this kind of gave more angles, more elaboration on the fight they had just to showcase their powers clashing with one another, a bit more than they did in the original time the scene occurred, that being in the first Amazing Spider-Man comic book. This doesn't really have anything new to it, like truly. It's just a more in-depth look at a fight we already got. It's cool if you're a fan of both magazines and wanted to see Spider-Man's powers squared up against the Fantastic Four's a bit more clearly or a bit more elaborately. But other than that, there's not much to see here, and thus I think it earns its spot in the 35th place. In 34th place, we have the Clown and his Masters of Menace from Amazing Spider-Man 22. Now, I do not like any of the circus-themed villains we've had appear in this early era of Spider-Man. He's fought them twice, the Circus of Crime or whatever, Ringmaster is the leader of it. And I just don't enjoy them as villains because one, they're pretty small fry, nothing actually massive is going to happen with or around them. They're not even strictly Spider-Man's villains. I think Ringmaster is borrowed from the Hulk. And so you just don't have that much expectations going in, and they all look so goofy, which I know these aren't like true criticisms, but the story structure is also usually pretty lacking. It's just a fight against villains that you know Spider-Man can realistically easily take. I mean, the only real like drama comes from the fact that Ringmaster can hypnotize people with his cap, but there's a million ways to inhibit that or circumvent it entirely. And in this issue specifically, not much of the Ringmaster even occurs because the clown sort of takes over the circus of crime. And yeah, basically, it's just a dry fight of Spider Man versus the circus. The only interesting thing is when he fights like a Princess Python, I believe her name was, there's this whole little comedic sequence where Spider Man really doesn't want to use any kind of force against a lady or a woman, right? And so he finds himself in this position where he's not going to throw hands with her, and it's a little bit comedic. I think it's supposed to be, but really, other than that, there's nothing in the issue of substance or something that you'd particularly remember, either on the front of Spider-Man in his battles or Peter Parker and his relationships. Basically, him and Betty and JJJ just attend this art show where things go wrong when the circus comes to, steal stuff. Yeah, not very interesting to me. 34th place. 33rd, we have the other appearance of the Circus of Crime, Amazing Spider-Man 16 Duel with Daredevil. Again, really the only interesting thing that happens is Spider-Man gets effectively hypnotized by Ringmaster's hat, in which case Matthew Murdock, the Daredevil, has to step in. He was attending the show that the circus was at. It was a whole thing. And basically fights Spider-Man, who's under the spell of Ringmaster. Eventually, the hypnotization gets broken, and the duo team up to take down the circus. And yeah, I mean, the only cool thing to see here is the team up between Spider-Man and Daredevil. I've never been particularly into Daredevil myself, so it's not something that I get like excited about for a premise to begin with. And again, there's no huge relationship stuff or school life stuff going on with Peter Parker, which is the other interesting part of Spider-Man besides the villains and the fights. Really, the only thing I can think of is I think this may be the first time Mary Jane's name is explicitly stated. Aunt May has been trying to fix him up with Mrs. Watson's niece, but she keeps referring to her as the niece. And I think this is the first time the name Mary Jane is spoken by Aunt May. So that's a little bit significant, but again, it's not really anything worth writing home about. We don't even see Mary Jane's face till a long time later. So yeah, again, it's just the circus of crime. The Ringmaster is here again. I don't really care for them as villains. The issue doesn't enthrall me. If you're a Daredevil fan, you might be interested in seeing the first team up and fight, first team up and fight, as it so often goes with Spider-Man and the different heroes he encounters. But with Daredevil, so yeah, this could be more interesting to you if you're a Matthew Murdock fan. But for me, it didn't do much. 32nd, we have another one that's not technically part of the Amazing Spider-Man series, Tales to Astonish 57, On the Trail of the Amazing Spider-Man. At first glance, this seems like it could be pretty interesting, but it was just kind of underwhelming. We get interactions between Ant-Man, the Wasp, and Spider-Man, which is probably the funnest part of the issue. Wasp sort of has like a natural aversion to Spider-Man, both because their personas kind of clash when they interact, especially their dialogue. They're always making sarcastic jabs at each other. But the fun part is Wasp attributes it to spiders and wasps being natural enemies in the wild in nature. So it's just kind of fun to see that thematic clash between them. Other than that, there's just a little plot by Egghead to use like the communication with ants against Ant-Man slash Giant Man at the time. And they use the ants to report that Spider-Man is after Giant Man, and when they investigate, Spider-Man at the time, Peter Parker is much more hot-tempered than he, often is in other representations of himself. This early era, there is quite a bit of like emotional flare-ups with him. I feel like he just likes messing with people, especially other heroes, a lot, and he's so down on his luck so often. He's usually in somewhat of a bad mood. But anyway, they have a little clash, but once they discover that the real enemy here is Egghead, they basically just team up as a trio and take him down. Again, if you are really into Ant-Man and Wasp, it might be more interesting to see this like very early, I think, first interaction between Spider-Man and them. It is kind of cute, the exchanges between Peter and the Wasp that occur. But other than that, it's just your standard crossover issue. It is fun to interconnect the Marvel Universe, but these things just aren't going to rank as high as actual Amazing Spider-Man comic books that hold their own water. In a similar trail of thought, we have the Avengers 11, the Mighty Avengers meet Spider-Man, where this time Spider-Man actually plays, well, sort of, plays a much more central role to the issue. Interestingly, from 3,000 years in the future, Kang is plotting revenge against the Avengers, and what he decides to do is make like a perfect robotic clone of Spider-Man to then send back in time, cause trouble with the Avengers, perhaps take them down ultimately. Like they end up at the Temple of Tripod where a trap is set. It's it's basically just bait and trap the Avengers with a robotic clone thing of Spider-Man, which this is Kang from 3,000 years into the future, and this is his best idea. Furthermore, in my panel of the day series, we went over this one already, and we see that in one of his like most dangerous villains of this time that he's looking back on, Mysterio appears in it. And while Mysterio is one of my favorite villains and like a cool master of illusion, I don't think someone from 3,000 years of the future with time traveling tech would necessarily label Quentin Beck as one of the most dangerous villains of the time. Like, like he's with some other like Doc Doom, some other much more like A-lister villains up there as far as power levels go. But that aside, the whole thing's just kind of goofy if you try to put a logical lens onto it. But other than that, it is kind of fun because the Spider-Man robot literally just like goes around trying to fight the Avengers. Then the real Spider-Man comes and puts a kibosh on the whole thing. And Kang basically just goes, foiled again. I'll get the next time classic villain speech. It is just so goofy though that a time traveler 3,000 years in the future thinks the best way to take down Earth's mightiest heroes is with a Spider-Man clone. Like Spider-Man already isn't like comparable to the Avengers' power. Like you got Thor reliably on the Avengers at the time. Every now and then Hulk is on the side of the Avengers. Like really, like I don't know. I love Spider-Man, but he is significantly more street level than the Avengers squad, you know? So I don't know. It always just is weird to me. But anyway, Kang deduced that was the I don't even know. He thought it was the best course of action, but then it didn't even work at all. So how reliable is even the future foresight anyway? That aside, yeah, but it was cool. So, like proper interaction between Spider-Man and the Avengers in an Avengers comic book. Probably the most we've gotten out of these little crossover issues here. So it doesn't deserve as low, but it still comes in at 31st, not the highest for sure. In 30th place, now we have the Strange Tales Annual number 2, Human Torch on the Trail of the Amazing Spider-Man. This one I actually kind of liked. A lot of the interactions between Peter and Johnny are endearing as they have this sort of like friendly rivalry going on. They both respect each other, but both get under each other's skin in just the right ways. I really like their dynamic in this early era of Spider-Man. Basically what goes on in this one is Torch is already jealous of Spider-Man for taking some spotlights on the Time magazine, and when Spider-Man is framed for an art crime by a guy, I feel like the guy's named the Fox. It's kind of, I don't know much about the Fox, but he's the villain of this one. Frames Spider-Man. Torch takes the excuse to exchange blows with him. But then, as things usually do, things get cleared up. Spider-Man's name gets cleared, and then the two have to team up and are surprisingly effective at taking down the Fox. I believe this is the issue, though, where we get the really cool panel. I put it on my Panel of the Day series once again, which is on the Shorts tab of my channel. But they have their meeting place established as a Statue of Liberty, and we get this really cool scene where Spider-Man is calling out for Torch from the Statue of Liberty. Is probably the best thing to come out of it. Again, I just enjoy these the dynamics between these two characters. So yeah, it gets higher than the other crossovers for sure. 29th place, we have The Terrible Threat of the Living Brain, or Amazing Spider-Man number 8. And at this point is when we're sort of like getting done with the crossovers now and getting more into the actual Spider-Man centered stories. The main plot of this centers around the living brain, where a scientist who has constructed this super advanced AI supercomputer thing brings it to Peter's high school of all places to show it off. And supposedly you can ask it almost anything and it'll be able to give you a logical answer because it just has so much information and data inputted into it. And what the class decides to ask it is, who is Spider-Man? And obviously Peter is afraid that the brain is going to figure out that it's him, and all suspicion will be placed on him. His identity will be exposed. And other things that happen around it is Peter and Flash have a boxing match as sort of, his bully status over Peter is starting to get to a head here, and he really wants this physical clash with Peter over different stuff that has been brewing between them. Through some mishaps, the suspicion of Spider-Man's identity is reasonably placed on Flash Thompson, and Peter Parker kind of helps to orchestrate it a bit, which is kind of funny because, again, being Spider-Man is probably one of the coolest things about Peter, but, he's purposely attributing it to his worst enemy at the time, just because he needs to get out of the suspicion being placed on him. The living brain fight isn't all that cool. I mean, it's kind of fun that it takes place in the hallways of Peter's high school, but I think we already got that with Sandman at this point in time, and that was just a much cooler fight. But yeah, the drama of is the living brain going to be correct about Peter's identity never really got resolved because it spit it out in like machine language that would have had to been decoded, and Peter just kind of took the slip and had the class forget about it with all the excitement, and it was not yet revealed what's on that slip. But yeah, so it was kind of like even the tension and curiosity that was left ambiguous. So it's not like the coolest story. It is kind of cool when you think about it. Can an AI guess Spider-Man's identity, but we also just don't get to know. I get the ambiguity is fun. You can argue about whether it got it right or not, but yeah. The boxing match between Peter and Flash went about as you'd expect it to. Obviously, Peter has to hide his spider strength, but he was able to get in a blow that basically knocked out Flash. And then there's all these excuses he comes up with. Not a bad story. It's just, on the lower end, especially compared to some of the other villains. I don't find the living brain to be all that compelling. Now, there was a second half. It wasn't even as long to be considered a second half, but there was a second part to this issue where it's called Spider-Man Tackles the Torch. And I really don't know why. Like, obviously, there's this little friendly rivalry between them, but it really gave no reason for Spider-Man to just decide to do this one day. He just decides to go to Torch's house and try to basically steal his girlfriend out of the blue, like try to like impress her and stuff, get a date with her. I don't know how serious he was about that, but that wasn't his thought bubbles. Basically, just goes to his house and like crashes his party, starts showing off. Torch gets upset and fights him, to which Spidey's basically like having fun with it. Eventually, the Fantastic Four themselves have to intervene because the two don't stop quarreling, and Invisible Woman basically stops Spider-Man herself and scolds the two boys, and then Peter flirts with her basically and goes on his way. I guess it literally exists just to see another fight between him and Torch. I know I was just sort of glazing the dynamic between them, but this really, there is almost zero context as to why Spider-Man just chose that day to honestly be a dink. Like, he wasn't like, Spider-Man didn't feel like the good guy of the story. I know he did like flawed characters and all that, sure, but like, I don't know. It felt really weird for Spider-Man just to do this with such little context as to why it was happening. Coming at 28th place, we have Marked for Destruction by Doctor Doom. This is the first encounter between Doctor Doom and Spider-Man. It's pretty much all action-oriented, based solely around Spider-Man fighting Doctor Doom on somewhat his home turf. Nothing all that exciting happens beyond the Fantastic Four getting lightly involved. Probably the coolest part about this issue was to pull a prank on Peter. Flash Thompson dresses up in a Spider-Man costume that the girls made him. And basically, Doctor Doom mistakes him as Spider-Man and abducts and captures him. So Spider-Man needs to save the guy. And yeah, Peter has to save his bully. Oh, haha. And then, yeah, it doesn't even, like, the ending isn't even climatic to it. The Fantastic Four basically show up, and Doctor Doom's like, oh, I'm outnumbered, and dips the heck out of there. So, yeah, I mean, again, first meetings between characters, it's fine, it's whatever, nothing all that exciting happens, but the Flash Thompson thing was a little bit interesting to see. In 27th place, the second annual of Amazing Spider-Man, The Wondrous World of Doctor Strange. Now, this is one of my more favored team-ups between two superheroes as far as meeting up for basically the first time goes. Spider-Man and Doctor Strange throughout the decades have had an interesting dynamic between them, and it all starts here. And this is, in many ways, this is Spider-Man's first dipping his toes into the water, into the world of the mystical. I know it's sort of a debate as to how street level Spider-Man should be and whether or not he should be constantly wrapped up in these grander scale magical adventures, but yeah, this is sort of when that begins for him, when he deals with different dimensions and just straight up wizardry and magic via Doctor Strange's villains and consortium. But yeah, basically it's kind of a fun little plot where Xandu brainwashes some thugs, makes them pretty much invincible, and sends them after Spider-Man. Doctor Strange has to help them after being incapacitated. There is some leaps of logic as to, why the villains don't just finish off Doctor Strange when they theoretically had the chance, and of course the stuff you run into with magic when it's like, well, why don't they just do this or that? And overall, it is just fun to see Spider-Man's first encounter with such mystical forces beyond comprehension, and obviously it establishes a friendship between him and Doctor Strange. He even expresses that he's in his debt or he has a friend in him for the future, which makes a lot of sense, especially given their interactions later on in the Spider-Man mythos. But yeah, overall, it doesn't get too high, but it's certainly better than some of the other character team-ups that we've had in this list so far. Now we've come to 26th place, the very first issue of Amazing Spider-Man. After blowing up in popularity in Amazing Fantasy 15, he was quickly awarded his own series that, soared to popularity as well. Yeah, right on the cover, they feature the Fantastic Four. That's one of the first debacles he gets in. Basically, it showcases Spider Man's powers and contrasts them with the Fantastic Four's powers. We talked about this in the issue where they sort of redid the fight with more scenes to it. But yeah, I mean, it's okay. It makes sense for him to be put against Fantastic Four right away just because they are already an established group within the, new Marvel era of comics, the Marvel age, right? And it does quickly establish his interactions with Human Torch, the likes of him. But other than that, there's two more little subplots going on here. That being Spider-Man having to save J. Jonah Jameson's son, who was also introduced in this issue, by the way, the great JJJ, from a malfunction regarding the space shuttle he was going into space with. That character will be reused later. Obviously, Jameson goes on to become a very important character in the series, so those introductions are very valuable, and it already creates this situational irony where, Peter has to save the son of the person who's turning the public against him. We see that irony repeated, well, not the exact same irony, but irony like that's repeated over and over again throughout the Spider Man saga. And yeah, other than that, we get our first technically supervillain, if you can call him that, the Chameleon. I mean, at the moment, he just has like little bit larger than life means of becoming other people through disguises, but at the end of the day, it is meant to be more of a practical like disguise thing. So I don't really know if you call him a super villain or just a crafty normal villain. But yeah, one of the first recurring villain things that Spider-Man fights, the Chameleon. Also, it establishes this whole idea of Spider-Man's reputation constantly being on the line with the Chameleon impersonating him like that early on. This just sets the tone for a lot more of what's to come within the Spider-Man comic books, and for that is very respectable. But as far as like an enjoyable read stacked up against the others, it gets this low only because I have much more fun reading other issues where Spider-Man has had more time to develop. 25th place, we have the Enforcers, the 10th issue of Spider-Man. Now, I must admit, I've never been much of an Enforcers guy myself. They seem very low-level villains. They're like, one's basically just strong, and the other two have a limited amount of acrobatic skill, like Fancy Dan. He's got the moves. Montana has the lasso. But they never, I can never buy them as that much of a threat. So the fight here, like the action is certainly not what I'm looking forward to in this issue or finding cool about it. What I do like is the big man who ends up being Foswell, a reporter at the Daily Bugle. That actually goes on to become more valuable than it originally is in this issue, with Foswell becoming a recurring character and this whole thing being a part of his past. So it gets bumped up this high, I feel like, because it does have inherent value to later plot developments of the series. Things I like about it is Aunt May gets a little bit ill and goes to the hospital, and Flash actually shows up and expresses a certain amount of concern for her, showing that he does indeed have a very human level of care for Peter and the people close to him, even though he's constantly bullying the guy. Other positives, the fact that Peter has to do a blood transfusion to basically save Aunt May's life, and that plays a very big role in one of my favorite issues of Spider-Man of all time, which we won't talk about on this list because it is during the college era of Peter Parker, but we'll get to that probably next tier list we do. And then, of course, we get the confession from J. Jonah Jameson stating how he is secretly jealous of Spider-Man, jealous of his seemingly inherent virtue. Because he himself is very selfish, self-centered kind of man, and no matter how successful he gets in his business, he feels like he can't attain that level of heroism that Spider-Man just carries with him. And because of that, he refuses to believe that Spider-Man is all good and wishes to tear him down at, as we soon come to see, very nefarious, causes and means as well. So yeah, it is just nice to get this look into J. Jonah Jameson's head and be led to believe that he's a bit more complicated of a character than we have been shown thus far. 24th, we have Where Flies the Beetle, another Spider-Man and Human Torch team up against a villain that is actually basically torches, if you can assign villains to certain heroes. And again, it's just Spider-Man and a Torch having to learn to work together to defeat an adversary. Peter does help out Doris, Torch's girlfriend, which, sets up a little bit of animosity between them. Of course, Torch gets jealous about it and confronts Peter on the street, in which Peter has to tell off Human Torch as he's a bit frustrated with the whole thing. That's kind of a funny scene. But other than that, it is just a fight against Beetle. Nothing truly groundbreaking happens. However, I did very much enjoy the dynamic between him and Torch. both Spidey and Torch, that is, a bit more than I did in previous issues. There's more of it, a bit more substance there to the two characters. So yeah, it makes it this high, just barely above the Enforcers, because the fight against the Beetle was a bit of a spectacle to see with the combination of Torch's flame powers and Spider-Man's spider-like abilities. Third, we have Spidey Strikes Back, and fun fact, this is one of the first covers of an individual magazine issue I was ever exposed to, I believe, so this one is always kind of stuck in my head a little bit. He's got that iconic swinging pose that has been very much popularized by the like 1967 or something cartoon series of it. But yeah, this is kind of a fun issue because it is, as the name would imply, it's the start of a comeback for Spidey. Aunt May was ill. He didn't want to worry her about getting injured or possibly dying by fighting a villain, so he's been very timid recently. The public has been turned against him after he supposedly ran away from the Green Goblin. We'll talk about that scene later, but there's more context to it. Even Human Torch is beginning to doubt Spider-Man, but he's able to turn that all around once Aunt May starts feeling healthier and he feels uninhibited, a little bit less, scared that danger is going to find him and end him on account of Aunt May. Again, that becomes a recurring theme throughout the series, but it is fun to see Spider-Man make a comeback, win the side of the public, the very bipolar public, as to whether or not he's actually helped the society or not. But yeah, anytime you slap a Strikes Back in the title regarding the hero, it's usually pretty fun to see them come back from whatever rut they were in, whatever that may be. And of course, we have one of the more creative villains of Spider-Man thus far, the Sandman, involved, and Human Torch guest starring in the issue. You'll see a theme here. Human Torch is very present in this early era of Spider-Man. I think they loved contrasting the two because they're both teenagers, both the youngster superheroes, and Torch seems to have it all, while Spider-Man is always down on his luck, so it is a fun little foil characters to each other. 22nd place comes in Duel to the Death with the Vulture, the very second issue of Amazing Spider-Man, which also includes the story The Uncanny Threat of the Terrible Tinkerer. Most of this issue's favor comes in with the fact that it introduced the Vulture and had a very fun fight with Spider-Man and him up in the sky throughout the buildings. I have heard it considered by the letterboxes, whatever the people were, when the editors and stuff talked to the letters that they came in and printed in the back of the magazines, it was considered Spider-Man's first trial by fire. I would consider that to be the third issue for reasons we'll talk about when we get to it, but I can totally see how this fight really defines when Spider-Man was actually like a superhero, as this is his first real super villain fighting, with a guy that can literally use magnetic forces to fly around. He had to get creative to beat Vulture. The photo taking business has begun, and so Peter, that really kicks off Peter being his own photographer and selling it to J. Jonah Jameson. He has to escape a water tank in a rather, haunting sequence if you were to think about being put in that position yourself, and he keeps calm, and you would just think about the panic I'd have if I was seemingly trapped in a water tank, that Spider-Man keeps his cool and finds the way out. That's always very fun to see. And yeah, then of course he has to use his scientific knowledge a little bit, at least, to take down the Vulture. And I love when the union between Peter Parker's smarts and Spider-Man's powers are used to defeat a villain, which is oftentimes. Then the Tinkerer storyline was kind of interesting. Sort of the novelty of it is what puts it this high to me. It's literally Spider-Man encounters aliens and barely acts surprised, all that surprised about it. Literally there's aliens posing themselves as the Tinkerer and basically planning to get so much information and intel on the humans that they could one day invade pretty confidently. They are dissuaded from doing this after Spider-Man gets onto them and beats the crap out of them and escapes in their little spaceship. But yeah, it is weird that aliens were already playing a role in Spider-Man lore, basically, even though they don't come back forever. But yeah, it feels like a Fantastic Four story. Obviously, it's kind of on too small of a scale for them, I feel like, but it feels like it could be a Fantastic Four story, except it was a Spider-Man story. And just the fact that it happens this early on always confused me a little bit. Really, we're already resorting to aliens with Spider-Man. Funnily enough, next up on my list in 21st place is the return of the Vulture. The second time Spidey fights a villain. I believe this is the first time a villain is recurring. Spider-Man fought and defeated them before, and now they're back. This one just barely squeaks above the last one, just because the fight, I feel like, is a little bit more fun to watch. They fight within the Daily Bugle because Vulture comes in to rob them, and you see the printing presses going on during their fight. It's just kind of a fun scene to, how I talked about, it's kind of cool to see the Sandman fight within the high school, even though we haven't gotten to that issue yet. It is fun to see the Vulture fight within the Daily Bugle at these different environments other than just the open city or something like that. Yeah, that's basically just about it. We also get Peter flirting with Betty Brant in this, which begins to sow the seeds of their coming tumultuous relationship. And now in 20th, we're coming onto the positive side pretty soon here. We'll get in the upper half of the ranking. But nothing can stop the Sandman, Amazing Spider-Man #4. I've always liked the Sandman villain. I really like the Flint Marko character in some of the cartoons and Spider-Man 3, the movie, a lot more than I like the comic book iteration of the Flint Marko character, which doesn't happen often. Usually, I like the comic book variants better. However, here, at least at this time period, Flint Marko was a very simple, just a villain out for money, out for personal gain. But Sandman does, when you think about it, is a pretty unique set. Like, sure, it kind of, encroaches upon elemental powers, which are usually pretty basic, but the idea of being able to use sand to either make yourself basically impervious or harden yourself is pretty interesting. And it creates a situation where it is very hard to think of ways you can reasonably defeat him when you have a power set such as Spider Man's. And it's just glorious that he basically gets wasted by a drill and vacuum cleaner at the end. Just the way he gets defeated is quite hilarious. Again, with Sandman's powers, sometimes it feels like there's a bit of leaps in logic where it feels like Spider-Man really shouldn't have been able to bust out the win whenever they're in a close quarters fight. That actually is almost sort of brought up in a later issue that I really like with the Sinister Six and going on. But yeah, nonetheless, the fight between Sandman is something I always enjoy, and it takes place within the halls of Midtown High, Peter's high school, and I thought it was utilized a bit better than the Living Brain was for that location. So yeah, very fun, very fun. Just a classic fight between Spider-Man and a new villain that was being introduced for the first time. 19th place, we've got Face to Face with the Lizard, where the whole Connors family is introduced, and we see Spider-Man flying to Florida. I liked the change of scenery, the change of state, Spider-Man fighting in the swamplands of Florida was pretty fun. And of course, the lizard lore is something that goes on to become more and more relevant to the Spider-Man mythos as we go along, the Connors family being more involved gradually. But yeah, Connors, he earns a friend in Connors after he cures him of his lizard status. But it is one of the more interesting villains, given that Connors had genuinely good motivations that were just corrupted by literally being mentally altered by the lizard serum and becoming a full-blown lizard. The plan is interesting to take over the world's reptiles. The stakes are pretty high, right, if he was able to succeed at that. And it's almost icky, like a little bit scary, especially in the water parts where Spider-Man is fighting the lizard in the water. Like that is very I don't know what you kind of phobia you'd call that, but the idea of fighting something in the water, it always just terrifies me. So whenever it happens, it gives me like a little bit of the shivers, which I really like when it comes to fighting villains. But yeah, and then the figuring out it's actually Billy's father, and then Spider-Man being like, oh, I got to, I can't just beat him, I had to save him for this family, and succeeding in doing so. It's just a heartwarming little story that starts out a little on the creepier side of the whole reptilian ambush stuff. Obviously, it's hard to be creepy in this art style and comic book form, but the idea of the lizard is inherently creepy, especially when you think about how he was basically just stalking his family's homeland ever since becoming the lizard. Something I forgot to mention is this is kind of when Liz Allen's crush on Peter Parker starts to become more apparent and is exacerbated more and more as, ironic situations keep occurring with Peter and his dual identity of Spider-Man. Liz doesn't suspect him of being Spider-Man, and in fact, she had a crush on Spider-Man for a while there too. But yeah, circumstances keep aligning so that Liz Allen, the popular girl who's supposed to be dating Flash Thompson, is getting into Peter, and that causes some very romantic drama that unfolds throughout the high school era. So I do appreciate that appears in this comic issue as well. I don't feel like I've been that hard in any of these issues, but now I can start being a bit more positive. Well, yeah, issue 28, The Menace of the Molten Man. This is when Peter graduates high school, which is the much bigger of a plot development than the Molten Man himself. The Molten Man was just sort of, accidentally created by Spencer Smythe, who invented the original Spider Slayer for J. Jonah Jameson. And their fight is just as standard as it can get. Spider-Man goes into his apartment to hunt him down after he caused havoc in the city. Obviously doing the first thing that anyone decides to do when they get power, turn to a life of crime. So Spider-Man has to take him down. It's a bit of a struggle given that the web doesn't stick to the alloy of his skin, basically. But, he finds a way to outsmart him using his spider senses, is able to get his web to harden enough so that he's effectively tied up. And then the rest of it is just Peter graduating and moving on. But I did like the sense of finality but new beginning that his graduation had for him. The dynamic that changes between him, Flash, and Liz is very interesting to see, especially how it has developed ever since the earlier issues. Liz is actually starting to go on her maturity arc, realizing that Peter has viewed her as a dizzy blonde. And it's not just that she doesn't want Peter to view her that way, because she basically I pseudo rejects him here after crushing on him for a long time, and decides that she herself needs to get more mature for herself, which is pretty interesting. And goes off. We're not exactly sure what her after high school plans are here, but ironically, Peter and Flash both get a scholarship to the same college. Peter for science, Flash for sports, so they're going to be stuck with each other for probably another 4 years. But yeah, I just liked the send off it gave here, and especially the relationship between Liz, Flash, and Peter. Amazing Spider-Man 3, Spider-Man vs. Dr. Octopus, swinging in at 17th place. Now, my absolute favorite thing about this, obviously introduced Otto Octavius, who went on to become one of the big three or big four of Amazing Spider-Man villains. But it also, why I call this Spider-Man's first true trial by fire is it was the first time he was unequivocally beaten by an enemy. Dr. Octopus beat him, and beat him so good that he just basically callously threw him out the window, feeling as though he had nothing to fear from Spider-Man. Admittedly, this is a bit of a frustrating trope in this early era of comics, where villains keep thrashing Spider-Man to near unconsciousness and then not finishing him off, which obviously you're not wanting Spider-Man to be killed by a villain, especially lower level villains. But like it keeps happening to the point where it's just stupid. Like it's like just finish the guy off. But anyway, I'm not rooting for the villains, but they are just being objectively dumb with that whole thing. But anyway, Spider-Man was beaten so badly for the first time that he gets genuinely scared and considers quitting Spider-Man because he's so fearful that he won't measure up to the villains now. And it's actually Human Torch Johnny Storm, when he comes to the high school to give a motivational speech, that reinvigorates Peter's passion or drive, you could say. And he dons the Spider-Man costume once again and figures out how to beat Dr. Octopus at that nuclear power experimentation plant of radiation and stuff, where he originally gets the powers, where the neural link between his arms is born, and he's mentally damaged for the first time. But yeah, very interesting issue. I like that already we're getting the dynamic of Peter struggling with his identity and whether or not he even should continue being Spider-Man for his own health. And of course, Aunt May's health is always the ever looming factor, and should anything happen to him. So yeah, good issue overall, and that's why it gets sort of just above middle of the road here. Now, 16th place, The Man Called Electro, the first appearance of Max Dillon and the popular Electro character. You know him from either Spectacular Spider-Man or The Amazing Spider-Man 2, I'm sure. Those are probably the two most iconic representations of the character, in my opinion anyway, from what I've seen. But yeah, Electro's origin story makes a little less than 0 sense, but oh well. It's one of those fantastical leaps of logic where even in a sci-fi world it feels unlikely. Like in this, he was literally just fixing electrical wires, got shocked with lightning at the same time, and they give this explanation, but it feels just yep, it happened that way. Anyway, now he's infused with electric power, and he actually makes this little device. It's almost like a conduit apparatus or whatever that he uses to better channel his power. And of course, as all these villains do, he decides, I can use this power to be a criminal. So of course that, makes Spider-Man have to fight him. Betty Brant here visits Aunt May. This is through in the background. Spider-Man's relationship with Betty, Peter's relationship with Betty has been kind of on this slow burn of will they, won't they for a while, but it is starting to ramp up a bit, becoming more clear that they are romantically interested in each other, even if it's not fully stated yet. Interestingly, we see almost like a compromising of morals as Spider-Man fabricates a fight with Electro to sell to Jameson, desperate for money. We can see Peter doing some interesting things for money in this era, which I'd like to show he's not like a Mary Sue type character, like he's willing to do morally ambiguous things just to earn money that he genuinely needs to support his aunt. Also in this, we get Betty worrying that Peter is enjoying a life of danger and excitement through his photo taking, which reminds her of someone who is not yet named and remained a mystery until later. But of course that ends up being her brother, and she can't handle having her heart strained with both men she cares for deeply being into this dangerous life. So the relationship drama begins to manifest itself more within this issue, and you'll see a common through line of me really liking that appearing in my Spider-Man issues. But yeah, other than that, he just, he defeats Electro and wins the day once again. Not a bad issue. 15th place almost aligns with the comic number it's in, Amazing Spider-Man 14, The Grotesque Adventure of the Green Goblin. Now, this is the first appearance of the Green Goblin, by extension Norman Osborn, although we won't know that identity for a long while yet to come. I feel like this issue is one of those issues that in hindsight is better than if I had just read it at the time, because I know what Green Goblin goes on to become, I have an affinity for the first time a character like that is introduced. Same thing happens with Dr. Octopus and even Venom, even though that's a long time away. The issue itself gets boosted just because it introduces such a monumental character. But at this point in time, Green Goblin's quite different from the one we know. Like, he just wants to be a crime boss, basically. He has this whole plan to get Spider-Man to be killed after agreeing to a movie shoot that he orchestrates. He hires the enforcers to do it, which kickstarts a long line of Goblin using gangsters or mobsters as cannon fodder against Spider-Man. One of the more interesting things is they end up in a cave where they have to fight the Hulk. So the first real interaction between Spidey and the Hulk takes place. That's kind of fun to see. But yeah, the most intriguing part of this issue is the fact that it sets up the Green Goblin and establishes that his identity is not going to be revealed and that he's going to be this foil character to Spider-Man, that they both have a secret identity. One's on the side of good, one's on the side of evil. And Green Goblin quickly goes on to establish himself as a continually recurring character. And of course, we all know what's waiting ahead with Green Goblin. So, it has to be decently high in this list just because of the Goblin introduction. This issue is also dancing around its spot on the tier list. Kraven the Hunter, it's simply called. Amazing Spider-Man 15 and 14th place. I've never been quite the Kraven the Hunter fan. Prior to certain stories like Kraven's Last Hunt or even Nick Spencer's Hunted, I both enjoyed those quite a bit. But in general, I don't really like Kraven the Hunter. He feels like an underwhelming villain to me. I do like the idea of him hunting animal-themed people because he wants to prove himself as like apex hunter, basically. And Spider-Man would fall under his category of wanting to prove himself superior to. I also like his relationship with the Chameleon. They're old friends, half-brothers, all that stuff. And the dynamic between them is fun. Also bringing back one of Spider-Man's technically oldest villains, even though Chameleon is reoccurring a lot less than some of the other villains mentioned here. But more than that is the relationship drama that unfolds in this. Betty is getting jealous of Liz, who's like, the blonde bimbo, she calls her, that is into Peter at school. And while Peter doesn't necessarily reciprocate the feelings to Liz, he often has this natural gravitation towards flirting back with someone that flirts with him. And since Betty is not necessarily his steady girlfriend at the time, it's sort of like, it's very implied that they both kind of want to be in a steady relationship with one another, so Betty gets very jealous when Peter is around his high school girls that are into him. I'm not exactly sure how old Betty is in this timeline. She works at the Bugle. I feel like she said she left her last year of high school or whatever to take the Bugle job, so she can't be that much older than him. Like in Spectacular Spider-Man, she's like, oh, I'm too old for you, but I don't think that's the case here. She's around the same age, so it does make sense for Peter to both be flirting with her and high school girls, and for her to be jealous of a high school girl. But I do like that it establishes something that becomes on and on again a problem with the little sort of love triangle. It's not really a triangle because a lot of things don't go both ways in that. But anyway, yeah, so the whole, I like the relationship drama stuff the best, I guess, out of this, more so than the fight. 13th place, we have The Coming of the Scorpion, or Spidey Battles Scorpion. I'm not sure why they gave us an option as to which title here. They literally, in the title page, they give us an option as to which title we prefer, even though they're both pretty basic. But anyway, what I like about this one is it really, Jameson starts kind of going off the deep end. He literally sponsors the creation of the Scorpion to defeat Spider-Man, but of course, the Scorpion goes, berserk, abandons Jameson. Another grievous instance of a villain knocking out Spidey and then not making sure the job is finished occurs. So that's just what it is. But I do like the Scorpion versus Spider thing. They're both kind of terrifying little creatures that could be, I don't exactly know the pecking order of scorpions and spiders. I imagine a scorpion, I don't really know how often they coexist together, but I just imagine a scorpion is more dangerous to a spider than the spider is to a scorpion. I have no idea how that all works, but it doesn't seem like thematically their animal avatars clash together, sort of like how the spider and wasp thing with the wasp we mentioned earlier on. The character that is introduced here, Sitwell, who helped make the Scorpion, actually dies here, which is not common in this era of Spider-Man. We don't see characters dying all that often, so it is interesting to see the stakes raised a little bit by a character who's not objectively evil. You could, he's kind of doing sketchy things, but obviously he's not straight up evil. He dies in this as a result of trying to reverse his mistake of creating the Scorpion. So it is interesting that someone dies. I like it. It sounds weird, but it adds stakes. It adds drama to the story to actually have someone die, even someone as much of a side character as he was. Once again, Spidey is forced to save Jameson, basically a sworn enemy at this point. And but however, Scorpion's absolute, switch up to insanity kind of just reinforced his already existing perception of masked heroes, so he continues hating Spidey despite the fact that he owes him at least two now. In 12th place, we have The Goblin and the Gangsters, ASM 23. Now, I expected to like this a lot better when I first read it because obviously it involves the Green Goblin, but it is a pretty dry story of just a goblin trying to organize a, mobster crew once again, wants to kill Spider-Man once again. This is where the whole, goblin wanting to be the king of crime thing first shows up, that phrase specifically. Why it is this high is just because I enjoy the literal fights between Spider-Man and Goblin. They're usually pretty creative. Goblin is made to be especially clever and crafty. Like, I feel like if anyone were to be able to actually finish off Spider-Man out of these villains introduced, the Goblin would be the most likely one to do it. He's actually smarter than most of them. However, what this issue does do really good is it introduces Foswell once again. I know he's already been introduced, but he's hired back by Jameson after being released from prison as an act of charity and goodwill towards an ex-convict as a, means to boost his image. But because the tip that leads to the bust of the gang Goblin is trying to organize comes from Foswell, and there's no real, totally kosher way it seems that he would know this, it sets up this mystery as to, is Foswell the Goblin? Is Foswell involved with the gang and mobster rings that the Goblin is trying to take over? And I love mystery stuff. I love ongoing story plot stuff. And yeah, sort of the whodunit side of Spider-Man, the identity crisis side of things, sort of manifests itself for the first time within the Green Goblin Foswell drama. 11th place, captured by J. Jonah Jameson, the first appearance of a Spider Slayer robot, and one of the first times, this is after the Scorpion, so the second time J. Jonah Jameson has gone off as deep end to literally end Spider-Man himself. But this is really fun. It introduces Spencer Smythe. Again, obviously the Smythe family name and the Spider Slayer concept goes on to become a much bigger problem much later on in the series, but points for introducing that whole concept here. It is fun that Jameson got to control the robot and have his face on it, so in a weird sort of indirect sort of way, Spider-Man is clashing with JJJ, which is fun to see. The commentary back and forth between them as the fight is unfolding is really genuinely comedic. There's some in my panel of the day we highlighted a very comedic scene from it. I feel like this era of Spider-Man specialized at creating situational comedy in and amongst tense action sequences, which is very that's a cool thing to balance in my opinion. Even though it has that cheesy comic book flair, I feel like you go to comic books for a bit of corniness, a bit of cheese. So, I feel like if you're reading a comic book, you should have already accepted that that's what you're in for, and in which case, when it appears, it feels good. But one of my favorite parts is technically Mary Jane appears for the first time in this. We don't get to see her face, but Liz and Betty by fate both end up angrily storming into Peter's house, competing with each other, finding that Mary Jane is there, seeing that she has the beauty of a screen star, and then leaving both offended that Peter would not tell them about her even though she's so beautiful, and thinking that he spends time with her, even though the reader knows that he has not spent any time with her. Aunt May has just tried to puppeteer their get-together. I'm not exactly sure why they were holding off on her appearance for so long, because I understand Peter thought that she wasn't going to be that much of a catch for him given that Aunt May was setting her up with him, but Betty and Liz acknowledge that she looks like a screen star, so that is already the cat's out of the bag on that regard, but we don't get to actually see Mary Jane for many more issues to come, so I don't totally get the play there, to be completely honest with you, from a writing perspective. I get that if you want her to become someone that is an ongoing love interest for Spider-Man, obviously MJ has become literally the flagship example of romance within Spider-Man other than Gwen Stacy, and she's been dead for decades. But I don't understand why you wouldn't string it on a little bit less, at a lesser pace, a little bit longer. Why do this now? I feel like maybe you should do that closer to when she's actually going to be revealed, or play your cards right so that she's not revealed to be a screen star yet, so it can be shocked when that actually happens. When she's revealed to be a beautiful redhead, you already know she's hot, right? So I don't know. I feel like that could have unfolded a little bit differently, but hey, points for MJ appearing and already causing trouble in Peter's romantic life. In 10th place, we have Turning Point, not to be confused with ASM 121, which, that's a whole different thing. But the first time that, this is an actual title called Turning Point, not just on the cover as with 121, the literal title of it is Turning Point. But this is when I feel like it really dials up the personal human drama that it and integrates it directly into what's going on with Spider-Man. Basically, Doc Ock is back from prison, and Betty's brother, who, as we mentioned earlier, she is hesitant to date Peter because of his dangerous photography job because her brother is wrapped up in dangerous stuff. Her brother is wrapped up with some very bad people, which Dr. Octopus, Otto Octavius, also immediately gets involved in after I think did he escape prison or was he released? He escapes prison one of these. No, he escapes prison in the Sinister Six one. I think he served his time and was released in this or something like that. But anyway, he's back out there and he immediately gets up to no good again. I like the drama between Betty, Peter, and her brother. It dials up the romance. It dials up the even just the interrelationships between our characters. And we do get a sense that Peter genuinely loves Betty Brant in this, or as much as you can love someone that you're not fully steadily dating, but there is definitely the romance in the air between the two. I feel like that becomes explicitly clear in this issue where it was a little bit dubious before. It does end with Betty's brother tragically dying in the fight with Spider-Man as a stray bullet hits him after, the gang the bad people he was involved with directly shot him, even though it was a part of the struggle with Spider-Man. Betty momentarily blames Spider-Man, but quickly realizes that that's a folly. But anyway, this is when tragedy really strikes. And like I said, not many characters are dying at this time. So even though Betty Brant's brother was just a side character for a short amount of time, his death does feel like impactful since it wasn't a dime a dozen back then. In ninth place is the issue coming immediately after it, Unmasked by Dr. Octopus. Now, it might just be because I was younger when I was first reading these. I collected the Marvel Masterworks reprints when I was young, and I would read these, so I was a lot more affected by drama. But this genuinely felt very tense, and I was wondering what the heck was going to be done about it when I did first read this, so some nostalgia might be playing in here. But I think it genuinely is a good story. Betty Brant gets abducted by Dr. Octopus in an effort to draw out Spider-Man because he knows Spider-Man saved her on the boat that they fought on in the last issue we talked about. And but Spider-Man, Peter Parker himself has become very sick. His powers aren't working correctly, so he goes out with his feverish state as Peter Parker in the Spider-Man costume and fights Doc Ock that way. And Doc Ock, that's how he's able to unmask him, because he easily defeats him and unmasks him in front of JJJ, in front of everyone, like the world basically. However, no one believes that it's Spider-Man because he didn't exhibit the spider-like powers he normally has, and Peter Parker would, of course, have motivation to try and save Betty Brant. This really incepts Liz's intense crush on Peter, like seeing that he would do something so brave for this. And then also, I don't know, it has this irony to it. Repeatedly, there's moments where Spider-Man's identity should have been outed, but due to a combination of context and circumstance, no one figures it out, and that is really well shown here. And then, of course, just Dr. Octopus is a fun villain to fight. They kind of foil each other with the eight-limbed theme, so it is just fun to see the fight between Doc Ock. Yeah, very, very solid issue, very solid drama. Place is the menace of Mysterio, almost entirely just because Mysterio is one of my favorite Spider-Man villains. He would be on the Mount Rushmore for me alongside Goblin, Doc Ock, and Venom. Mysterio would be the fourth for me personally. And yeah, I just really like the villain so much. Not a crap ton happens in this issue in comparison to others regarding the human side of these characters, so it's probably a bit higher than you might, expect me to put it, especially in relation to the others. But I just love Mysterio so much, and his introduction here was very good. The fight between him was fun. It directly inspires many of the fights that happen with Mysterio and other animated series like Spectacular Spider-Man. Yeah, anyway, just Quentin Beck Mysterio, one of my favorite Spider-Man villains. He gets introduced here. The fight is very good. The action is enthralling here. Sometimes I'm more caught up with the relationship stuff, as I keep mentioning, rather than the fights, because in this old era, the artwork is great for the time. Everyone worked on it, is very talented, but compared to the modern issues, the artwork isn't crazy, so the fights don't feel as high octane as they do in modern comics. So a lot of it comes from the interrelationship drama and progression of the characters that I like the most. However, this one, the fighting is genuinely creative, genuinely fun. So literally just because I like the villain so much, it rockets up to the top 10 in this list. Seventh place, we have ASM 27, Bring My Goblin Back to Me. This is the conclusion to the little mini arc that involved the Crime Master and the Green Goblin's struggle for power in the criminal underworld. Now, I expected to like this one a lot better. It was still pretty good. It resolved the mystery of the Crime Master, revealed him to be Lucky, and had Foswell don his identity as Patch, or well, he already had, but it revealed that he was Patch to the reader, not to other people, which explains the mysterious stuff surrounding Foswell, even though he might not be a criminal. even though, I feel like there's still reason to suspect him at this point. But yeah, the identity mystery of the Crime Master is something I really enjoyed. I love, like I said, I love the identity, who done it stuff in Spider-Man. But given the name of the issue, Bring My Goblin Back to Me, I thought Green Goblin would play a much bigger role in it. And realistically, Goblin fires a few shots and then flies off, and the rest is Spider-Man tracking down Crime Master, and in the very cops and robbers kind of way, discovering the truth of his identity and why the criminals were doing what they did. Also, the fact that they obscured his identity so much and revealed him to be Lucky felt underwhelming. However, the explanation they gave for it was satisfying, as in, like, in reality, it's not always someone you already know. It could just be some random person. Like, Peter remarks how he doesn't even know the guy it was revealed to be. So I like how they kind of took a turn for realism with the identity reveal. But yeah, it's this high just because it does conclude some of the identity drama stuff that was set up in the last issue, which I liked better. But I thought overall I expected to like this issue better than I actually did, even though I did end up liking it quite a bit. Now in sixth place, just shy of the top five, we have ASM 18, The End of Spider-Man. If you ask me, this is so early on in the comic book timeline. There's been way too many ends of Spider-Man promised at this point already, but his comic books, what are you going to do? It's going to be stacked with like the old day equivalent of clickbait. But basically, Spider-Man had to run away from the Green Goblin in an issue prior because of stuff involving Aunt May and her illness. So the public now views him as a coward, and because of Aunt May's weakened state, he is way too nervous to fight. We were talking about this a little bit ago, because he doesn't want anything happening to him. He doesn't want him to be injured. He doesn't want to, well, certainly not to be killed, because that would basically kill Aunt May, he's thinking. So it's not him being cowardly because Peter Parker or Spider-Man has cowardice. It's him avoiding confrontation because of Aunt May's health. And this brings up a very interesting moral debate that has nested itself within the Spider-Man lore, basically. And that's, do you value the lives of other people or the lives of those close to you more, basically? And it's like, well, there's more people to be negatively affected by Spider-Man not being in action, but if it causes Aunt May to be negatively affected by going into action, should you have done it as Spider-Man in the first place, right? It's kind of a moral conundrum, and it forces some very uncomfortable conversation topics between who you prioritize in life. It's very, very interesting. I've always loved that part of Spider-Man. And just seeing Peter so cautious like this, seeing how it just absolutely turns the public against him. And then a very heartfelt scene where Flash dresses as Spider-Man in order to try to, persuade the public opinion back in Spidey's favor, but obviously he's not powered up, so it pretty much ends horribly. But yeah, Flash Thompson, #1 fan of Spider-Man. The irony there, right? Obviously he's the bully of Peter Parker. These older era comics loved the irony that they could set up. But yeah, I felt there's a lot of things to like in this issue, even though it's like one of the first ones where, I think the first one where Spider-Man doesn't actually engage in a single fight all issue. Very creative. First comic in the top five, we have ASM 17, The Return of the Green Goblin. Now, obviously, this is a fun fight between Spidey and Green Goblin. Like I said, those are some of the most creative action sequences with, I don't know, you'd call it like the fight choreography or something like that. But once again, it involves Human Torch, who inconveniently gets in the way while fighting Goblin, but also it bears witness to Spider-Man running away. This is the issue where Aunt May falls incredibly ill, so Spidey has to duck out of the fight to go get to her, literally mid-fight. And part of the reason why I did it was because Torch he felt could handle Goblin. But yeah, so he looks like a coward to the general public at an event where it was supposed to be Spider-Man showing up. Flash had organized like the Spidey fan club meeting and promised Spidey would be there in like the paper, therefore igniting Spider-Man being there, even though that wasn't formally decided beforehand. But yeah, it's everyone bearing witness to the fight between Spider-Man and Goblin, Torch getting involved, and then of course the terrible turn of events in which the entire public perception turns against Spider-Man at an event that was supposed to be something lifting him up. Very fun, very Parker luckish. But even more than that, there's this little identity scuffle he has as Liz Allen is like, how come Peter Parker is never around when Spider-Man shows up? So literally mid-fight, he has to keep changing back to Peter Parker, going to talk to her, then changing to Spider-Man to make it seem like they're both in the room or both like, present as the fight is unfolding. It's pretty funny. Also, the crowd thinks it's part of an act for a while. Again, another layer of irony there. But yeah, generally just a good fight between Spidey and Green Goblin. Again, more good interactions with the Human Torch and fun little identity drama with his social circle. So basically a pretty complete Spider-Man comic if you're looking for a fun story to read, even though Goblin does get away in the end, as he so often does. In fourth place, ASM 26, The Mystery of the Man in the Crime Master's Mask. Now, I talked a little bit about this in the last issue the Crime Master was relevant in, wherever that was rated. This one definitely has the identity mystery going on that I really like. That gets wrapped up with other goblin, like a goblin is here, and like Hobgoblin goes on to become very famous for identity, whodunit stuff. I really like that mystery around it, and I really, especially when it's involving goblins, and then it obviously involves the crime master here, who doesn't really go on to become that big of a recurring villain to my knowledge. So I do kind of wish perhaps there was someone involved that was a bit more important. Also, like I said, the reveal of who the Crime Master was pretty underwhelming. And Norman Osborn doesn't really even appear or matter enough at all in this early era to even have any reason to even think about him at all. I don't think he's even been name dropped yet in this point. So while I enjoy the tone of it a lot and the mystery that sort of wants you to start thinking about, especially when it involves Boswell and Patch and all that, and who has what info and how have they obtained it, and whose motive is what, depending on whose identity is what. So I just really like that, and I feel like the tension is there, the mystery is there, even though I do have some qualms with how the Goblin and Crime Master's identity actually unfolded. I think in this era of comic books, their writing was actually very good as far as gripping you with the storyline. Top 3, ASM 24 in third place, Spider-Man Goes Mad. This is a very interesting one, involving a carefully orchestrated plot to deceive Spider-Man into thinking he is actually going insane and suffering from vivid hallucinations. It's all orchestrated by Quentin Beck, who doesn't even don the Mysterio appearance in this at all. Rather, he plays in a chameleon-style format a psychiatrist named Dr. Reinhardt, who utilizes Jameson in the Daily Bugle to basically influence Spider-Man into seeding the idea that he might need a psychiatrist, and then utilizing hallucinations and knowing when to cause them through little animal robot things that he made. Pretty elaborate plan, all just to learn Spider-Man's identity ultimately. But basically, he gets and implants and reinforces the idea in Peter's mind that he in fact is going insane and could hurt someone because he's so mentally out of it. That entices him to show up at Dr. Reinhardt's house, which is also filled to the brim with sensory deceiving things to, further push Spider-Man down that rabbit hole, thinking he's insane. And he basically, the whole scheme is orchestrated to convince Peter that he needs to reveal his identity to someone, that being the friendly psychiatrist who seems to know him better than he does, predicted his mental downfall. But what's funny is Jameson discovers that he doesn't actually have any valid credentials as a psychiatrist and shows up at the house as Flash Thompson is hounding him, following him, and running after him because he hates JJJ, because JJJ hates Spider-Man, makes that clear in his editorials. And so what's funny is that Jameson and Flash combined, their efforts actually end up preventing Spider-Man, because it dismantles the whole scheme before Spider-Man reveals that he's Peter to Dr. Reinhardt slash Mysterio slash Quentin Peck. So Jameson, Spider-Man's professed worst enemy at the time, literally saves his entire career in this moment, which again, ultimate irony, they love doing this. But yeah, it's a very interesting comic book. It's very neat. I really have a soft spot for this one. Again, it is actually one of the first covers I encountered when I was a young child dipping my toes into the water of Spider-Man comic books. So it has a special place in my heart for multiple reasons, and I just really like the idea of a hero thinking they're going insane. As I feel like it is a possibility with the crap they experience and see, and then it actually being a very carefully orchestrated and elaborately devised plan of a villain that I think is underutilized, especially in these early eras. Well, we finally have made it to Amazing Fantasy 15, the origin story of Spider-Man and Peter Parker. Guys, this is just such an all-timer, such a classic. Like, literally just the origin story of Spider-Man is one of my favorites for a superhero. It's not super complicated, but it still has such emotional depth, has such a strong lesson to be learned. The phrase, with great power there must also come great responsibility, is something that rings true in my mind all of the time. And just, the whole idea of a young 15-year-old boy coming into such massive power by no fault of his own. It's a freak accident. He's not some chosen one. It's not some, well, that's a little bit debatable now, but it's not some act of destiny. It's a random, through science, that people weren't even meaning to create this Spider-Man, right? Like the spider, everything about it was circumstantial, especially back in this day. And then utilizing it for selfish purposes, for money, and then letting the power go to your head, being passive and letting a criminal get away and thinking it's not your problem, and then it does become your problem. And because his apathy towards that criminal, Uncle Ben gets killed, leaving Aunt May alone and leaving him in grief, right? The emotional impact, dude, when Peter realizes that the criminal that shot his Uncle Ben was the one he led away, is just like unparalleled in these early comic books. But yeah, there's such a lesson to be learned here, such good character development that all like it feels like such a complete story, and yet something that sets the foundation for an infinite story right at the same time. Um, it kickstarted this entire character for a reason. It put him on the map for a reason, ascended him to popularity with just one issue. It can't be any lower than this, especially related to these comic books. But yeah, one of my favorite issues in the entire series, even though it's just so short and so simple. And now, at the very top of my ranking for the high school era of The Amazing Spider Man, we have the very first annual for the series, the Sinister Six. This is the first time the group organizes itself completely in an effort to destroy Spider Man. There's no other motive here. Literally, the whole agenda is kill Spider Man, which makes it very dramatic. We get the now iconic scene of Spider Man losing his powers due to the psychosomatic turmoil that's writhing inside of his brain upon digging up the past memories of Uncle Ben. And very much like the thematic theme here is that it focuses on using your tragic past, using these mistakes you've made as a means of emboldening yourself and encouraging yourself to continually do the right thing, like finding power in the past, right? Rather than letting it consume you with guilt and let you personally dwell on why it makes you a bad person and whatnot. Like, I just love the fact that he loses his powers and it's all psychosomatic and he has to regain it by achieving that, confidence in himself and utilizing the tragedies of his past to become something greater as he once did. And especially like it really ups the stakes with Aunt May and Betty Brant being captured by the Sinister Six. The fights between them are all creative. They all have this little unique twist on them. So the theming, the character work, and the action is all top tier in this issue, and it is one of the most complete Spider-Man stories I think you can get out of a single issue comic, especially in the 1960s. But yeah, guys, that's my ranking in order from worst to best, in my personal opinion, of the high school era of the Spider-Man comic books. Obviously, leave your thoughts in the comments as to what you disagree with, what you did agree with, how your list might look different, or if you have the time, I would love to see an actual, number ordered list from you guys in the comments. That'd be cool. But yeah, I'll keep doing these probably every now and then I'll keep reading comics. My mission is to read every Spider-Man related comic book that matters to the mainline universe. So yeah, next up would be the college era. I'll probably rank those when I'm done that. And yeah, so subscribe if you're interested in Spider-Man. Other than that, just some things you might want to check out. If you like my methods of storytelling, I have a book series that I sell on Amazon, or you can listen to it as an audiobook if you become a channel member of the Lore Totem tier. You can join my Discord down below. That's completely free. You can get news and discussion there, or you can check out any of my other channels, which I'll have linked in the description as well. Thank you to all my amazing channel members that I have displayed on screen here. As for now, I hope you'll visit my web again soon, and until then, keep spinning your own.